Hello everybody. Oh. Alright. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some updated favorites. So I recently did a video here on this channel where I reacted to one of the earlier videos I ever did, and that was some of my favorites of all time. So I'll leave that linked above if you'd like to check it out, but it was basically me just looking back to see if those favorites were true or not. So because I did that video, I thought I would do an updated 2022 favorites video. So these will definitely be added to like the all-time favorites list. I have one crossover, but I don't have a whole lot of crossovers, so if I do favorites in the future, I feel like it would be like just adding to this list at this point instead of like completely revamping it. But as of 2022, these are what my favorites look like right now. So let's dive in. So we couldn't have this video without our favorite Jane Austen. So of course I have both Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion on this list because these are my two favorites by this author. I think Pride and Prejudice is the only kind of rollover from the previous video, but I honestly love these quite equally. These are my two favorites by her. Depending on like the season, I kind of like gravitate towards one over the other, but these are definitely my two favorites. So yeah, I think Pride and Prejudice is probably one of the very first like hate to love romances, whereas Persuasion was definitely one of the very first like second chance romances. But I love these two. These are some of my favorites. They had to be on this list. Okay, there is again no order to this. I just wanted to start with those. So I'm just going to grab off the pile and we're going to go from there. So the next one is Love Lucy by Lucille Ball, which is an autobiography about Lucy's life. This was published after her death. There is at least in my copy, there is like an introduction. Forward is really what it was called. And it was written by her daughter. And also like the audiobook that I found was narrated by her daughter too, which was just kind of cool to like listen to. But it's really just Lucy's life story. And I found it very fascinating because she doesn't focus a lot on her childhood. She really kind of focuses more on like her career and like once she gets to New York City, and because I think she does go to New York City, and like getting into like that industry and kind of what that looked like. I love the I Love Lucy show, so it was really cool to get kind of like a look at her life from like an outside perspective and kind of see kind of what that was like, because you really, especially with like the golden age of Hollywood, you really get a lot of rumors and you're never quite sure what really went down. And so I wanted to see her and how her life was. I know that she and then the guy that played her husband in I Love Lucy was actually her husband at the time, and so like they were married but have divorced. And I was just really interested to see her take on things. So this was so great. She just has a really fun comedic yet matter-of-fact writing style, and I devoured this so quickly. The next one is Heidi's Guide to Four-Letter Words, and this is by Tara Civic and Andy Arnst. I talk a lot about this year because I read it earlier this year, and it was seriously amazing. It's this girl, and she like gets a new job at like a recording studio, but it's a recording studio for smutty books, and like that's not her thing usually, and so it's really her kind of coming out of her shell and like a crush relationships of sorts that she has with the guy that lives next door. So it's super cute. It's got honestly some really great moments. There are some steamy scenes, but it's got everything from like humor to like girl power to like, honestly there's just so much to this story that is just honestly really great. I had a grand time. That was a very old saying. I had a really great time going through this. I read it so quickly. If you have the audiobook, it is an Audible book. I highly recommend that as well, because that just gives it an extra level, especially because these chapters, she has a podcast, and so there are chapters of like narration and there's chapters of like her actual podcast, and so it was really cool to see those aspects of it, and it was just really a really cute story. I love them so much. This was so fun, and seriously, if you like romance and you haven't read this yet, you very much need to. Another one is, I only picked up one, but it's the entire series of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. There are 4 out right now. I believe there's only one more left. and then the series is over and I'm so sad. But there's only 4 right now, and I seriously adore this series. It's basically a series about these 2 boys who get into a relationship, and it follows them from learning about their sexuality all the way through like mental illness, health issues, stuff like that, and just the 2 of them and their like romance. It does tackle some deeper subjects, but on the surface it's still a very, very cute, like feel good, like you end every single volume with like this very like feel good moment because they're just so sweet and like wholesome, and I love them so much. So yeah, I had to put this on this list because honestly, I need to reread these because like I haven't reread them since I read them originally, and they're just too pure to not reread, you know? So I love them. All right, the next one is also an entire series, and that is the Themis Files series, which is Sleeping Giants, Only Human, and Waking Gods. I think if I had to pick one, the second one would be my favorite, but I love these because these are great if you like the Illuminae files and things like that, because these are adult sci-fi books, but they are told in like a multimedia element, so it's mostly told through interviews. Actually, I think it's entirely told through interviews now that I said that. Yeah, interviews, and then like audio, like the transcripts of audio recordings. But it basically follows our main character, Rose, who finds this giant metal hand when she was younger and has spent her entire life researching the hand, where it came from, and stuff like that. And it gets extraterrestrial real fast. But the second one puts it into hypergear, and the third one just kind of like sums everything up. But I seriously love this series. I love the way it's told because yes, even though it is in these interview formats, you still get like such a real element to all the characters, and you really feel their stories. And like, it's not just like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like, it shouldn't work as far as like giving them like these 3-dimensional characters, but it works, and you get like all of you really feel for them, and it really feels like a full-fledged story. And I just really adore this. I think it's so great. Definitely worth a reread as well. I'm thinking I might have to reread some of my favorites because like this is definitely worth a reread and really easy to get through. So yeah, because there's only 3 and they're not very long, but I just adore them. I do. And they really get me into the sci-fi mood. If like I really want that kind of thing, this is definitely the series I gravitate towards. So, oh, it's so good. And I want to read more by this author, actually. All right, the next couple are some middle grades that I love, and we have I Speak Boy by Jessica Brody. This one, yes, it is loosely-ish based on Emma by Jane Austen, so that already had a like tick in its it already had a good thing going for it. But at the same time, I see myself in these characters so much. Like me when I was in middle school and like early high school is exactly what these girls are doing and thinking about and like reacting to things. And oh my gosh, I feel so seen in these pages. But it's really like just this girl who's trying to help her friends out with their romance, and she's not a really good matchmaker, but then she has an app that shows up on her phone, and the app is called I Speak Boy, and it basically translates what boys are saying and what they mean. And it's not just boys, it's like the male teachers and anyone who identifies as male. And so she can help people get with their crushes and see relationships. She can actually be a good matchmaker because she's got this app to help her out. And then of course there's just other stuff that goes along, but it's so fun because like looking at it now, some of the stuff that like the boys say versus mean is very realistic for like what people in general feel when they're in middle school, of like those insecurities and things like that. And so I think this is really great for people who are in middle school. Like it is middle grade, so people who are in middle school could be really seen through this, but also people who are older reading this could be like, oh yeah, that was for sure me when I was in middle school. I just feel like it can transcend all bounds. But it was honestly such a fun read. I think I read this in like a day, honestly. Maybe not quite, maybe a couple of days, but very quickly, and it was great. All right, the other middle grade is, of course, the entire School for Good and Evil series. I would say the first 3 specifically are a little bit more than the rest of them. But seriously, I know I talk about this all the time, but like perfect for fall if you guys want a good, fun fall series to get into. Also, they're doing a Netflix adaptation that's coming out in October. It might be out by the time that you're seeing this. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember when it comes out, but it's coming out in October. and I cannot wait for that. But I know I've talked about this so much, but this basically follows two best friends who go to the schools for good and evil. One is taken for the school for good and one is taken for the school for evil, and so these two friends are taken that year for the school, and they are so sure that like, oh, I'm going to be going to evil, I'm going to be going to good, and they end up going to the reverse of what they think they should be going to. And it's all about, is there true evil, is there true good, what is that blurred line, how does that work, can we make our own destiny, things like that. And it was just so fun. So this is definitely on the higher end of middle grade. I would even so far say that the last few books in the series, because it's a 6-book series, are more young YA than they are middle grade. But I seriously adore this series, and I don't know what it was, just the conversations I think were really interesting, and the world that Soman Chainani can really create with this school is just fascinating. I just love the conversations in this book, but I just adore this. I read it a couple years ago for the first time and have not stopped raving about it since. So I love it. Another one is one that shouldn't be a surprise because I think I raved about it every day since I read it, and that is The Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen by Siri James. This is one that, like, I've read 2 things by her. I even recently got a 3rd book by her that's also based on, like, Jane Austen, and I am just a bit obsessed at this point with this author. But this is my very first take on her stuff. I don't think I had the audiobook for this. I think I physically read this, and I sat in that chair for like Magical Readathon one of these past years and read this book in like 2 days. No, a day. No, it was 2 days. I was obsessed with this book. I didn't want to do anything but read it, and it was really good. So this is definitely not going to be everyone's book, but if you like Jane Austen and you love a lot of her books and like that kind of time period, then I think this would definitely be a book for you. So this book basically follows this woman who gets a poetry book. I think she's visiting London, and she gets a poetry book just from like a used bookstore, and she's obsessed with Jane Austen. And in the back of this book, she finds kind of an unfinished letter from Jane to one of her sisters. I think it is specifically Cassandra, because that's the one that she usually like sends letters to. That was like her favorite sister. And so in it's unfinished, so it never actually got sent, but in it like hints that there might be a manuscript that she had started writing that never got finished or found. And so she kind of like deciphers it, figures out where this manuscript probably was based on like when it was, like the date that she wrote at the very top, and like where historically people say that Jane Austen was. And so she finds this guy in this house, and she basically convinces him to let her in and let's search the house for this manuscript. So they do. And then the rest of the book is actually the manuscript. So like only like the very beginning, and like there's a couple parts in between that they like kind of come back to reality, and they talk about these two people, and they like get to know each other a little bit more. But most of this book is the actual manuscript, and it's supposed to be a very, very early manuscript, like before she wrote anything else was this book, or this manuscript. And so there are hints to characters that become characters in other books. It's the author's, I think, way of like hinting at all these characters and all these different books that Jane Austen wrote, and like kind of just like her nod to Jane Austen and her amazing work. But it's so good. It literally, like, I kind of forgot that I wasn't reading another Jane Austen book, because the way this was written was, in my opinion, so closely related to Jane Austen that like at this point, this was the closest that we are going to get to another manuscript or another book by her. And so it was just really cool to kind of have that, because I did see all those nods that she created to all these other different characters, and I loved it so much. It was so good. And I just adore this author now and the stuff that I've read by her, and like I'm hoping to get more and more things because I just really adore it. So yeah, if you are at all a fan of Jane Austen, then this has got to be on your list of books, because it's just honestly great. Another one is Roaring, and this is by Lindsay Duga. Now I will admit it's been a while since I read this one, so I definitely am due a reread. This book takes place in the Roaring 20s. We follow our two main characters, Colt, and then I can't remember her name, but there's a girl who's a siren. And in this world of the 20s, there's like a secret underbelly to the city. I think it's set in New York City, but I'm not sure. But there's a secret underbelly to like this world that has magical creatures in it. And so we follow Colt, who works for like the FBI equivalent of like keeping magical creatures kind of in check. And so sirens are thought to be very, very bad because their ability to convince people to do whatever they want. And there's definitely this layer of like, he's trying to find the siren specifically, and this layer of like what happens once he finds the siren, and then the history of both of them, and like the two of them ending up going on this adventure, and like I just love them so much. So if you like historically set, more realistic fantasy, let's say, this is definitely yours. If you like, just like, it's very interesting because there's a very scientific reasoning for why like these fantastical creatures exist, and I found that really interesting because it does make it seem more realistic as far as these elements and these people could actually be in today's world, and we just wouldn't know. And I just found that really interesting. That's a word I'm saying a lot. But it definitely has those like gangster vibes and all of those like 20s, roaring 20s kinds of, you know, vibes with the clothes and like the clubs they go to and stuff like that. So it was just honestly so fun. But I do have personal connection to this book specifically because it was the very first book that I was able to get an ARC of. Now, it was an e-ARC. It was my very first e-ARC, and then I proceeded to buy a copy because I loved it so much. But this is my very first e-ARC that I ever reviewed, and I enjoyed my time immensely. And so I just have like a special place in my heart for this one. But also, it was just really good. So like, not to negate the fact that this book was amazing. That's just kind of another reason why it's on this list. All right, the next one is a romance series that I feel like you all know are coming, and that is the Brown Sisters series, which is Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Act Your Age, Eve Brown. I am obsessed with this author. I'm obsessed with this series. I love the writing. So these series, I'm sure many of you know what it's about, but it follows 3 separate sisters and their respective romances, Chloe, Eve, and Danny. I really enjoy the writing of these because A, it's very British, which is a type of writing that I love so much. It definitely gives me the like, oh, what's that movie series I'm totally blanking on? Why am I blanking on it? Not Lizzie Bennett. The Bridget Jones Diaries, which is kind of very loosely based on like Pride and Prejudice, but it's like that British humor is in here, but a little more sophisticated. Each of them deals with a very tough subject. The first one is chronic illness and toxic relationships. The second one is trauma of some sense, and the third one, there's definitely stuff in here. Oh, there's autism rep. And so there's just a couple of things in here that each one is representative of certain things. There's definitely some trigger warnings. Each book has a little thing at the very beginning, so just be sure of that. Oh, this was a gift. I forgot about that. My friend Serena gave this to me. Oh, how fun. But I just adored this. The romances felt so realistic because like it wasn't your normal, like they didn't talk about their problems, but if they had, they would have solved everything. It was they talked about their problems, and yet there was still something. And so like they approached it in a very adult way, which I love so much. I just really love the writing of these books. I think it's fantastic, and I had such a great time reading them. Every time I got into one of these books, I laughed out loud multiple times. And there's just a very funny, sarcastic way that Talia Hibbert has her characters look at the world, and I thought that was great. So, yeah. Oh, those are so good. Those deserve a reread too. The next one is one that's not a common theme with books that I enjoy, but it was honestly, seriously one of the best books, and that is Who I Was With Her, and this is by Nita Tyndall. This is a book about grief, which is a very tough subject, which is why I said it's usually not on my lists of books, because I just kind of steer clear of the tough subjects. Not always, but I like books that have like, that are happy but have like conversations in them, but it's not like that is the focus of the book, whereas this one is 100% grief is the focus of this book. This book follows our main character who is in a secret relationship with a girl from a different school, and that girl ends up, at the very beginning of this book, she ends up dying in a car crash, and this girl can't really grieve because no one knew that she and this other girl were kind of a thing. And then this other girl's ex-girlfriend comes into the picture, and the two of them kind of console each other because they were both girlfriends of this girl. And it was really a beautiful story. I like that it's told, it was kind of told in 2 different timelines of like days after and days before this girl died. And so you see the relationship between her and our main character growing and becoming what it was before she unfortunately passes away. And then you see our main character kind of like really come to terms with herself. And so there's a lot of conversations in here. There's a lot of different ways that our main character deals with that grief, which I felt like was very realistic, because like grief is not just one set thing. You kind of do it in stages, and then you also kind of react differently based on the day. And then you've also got this conversation of a girl just kind of coming into her own, which was very beautiful to read. So not my usual, but honestly, seriously, a very good book as far as like conversations goes. And also the writing was just fantastic. Like I was maybe like a third of the way through this book, and I did have an arc of this one. So I was about a third of the way through this book, and then I went ahead and pre-ordered it because I knew I was going to want my own copy, because it was just, it's such a beautiful story. The next one is one that, again, probably you shouldn't be surprised is on this list because I'm obsessed with it. And that is Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. This is the first in this series, which I can't remember what it's called. Oh, there it is. The Montgomerys and Armstrongs. So this author has written a few Scottish romances. I buddy read this with my friend Taylor. We did a deep dive into her, specifically her Scottish romances. And they were all so fun, but this was the very first one that we read together. Actually, I'm pretty sure this was our very first buddy read ever, but it was also like the first book by Maya Banks, and it was by far both of ours like favorite romances. Favorite books, clearly. And it's just a beautiful story. So we've got our main characters, Evelyn, and I never remember names because I'm awful, Graham. And Evelyn is deaf, and no one around her knows that. She's kind of kept to herself because she had an accident, and because of this accident she has become deaf, and she can read people's lips. So when she's looking at them, she can understand them, but if they're talking to her, then she can't see that. And so that makes people think that she's kind of like dumb. And basically the king in this world has convinced these two rival clans to get married. So like he basically says, your daughter is marrying the laird of that one. Okay, good. And so she's basically forced by the king to marry the laird of this other clan. And so first off, she's terrified about going into a rival clan's situation, but everyone thinks that she is dumb, but it's the laird's kind of understanding that maybe there's a little more to it. And their relationship is some of my favorite. I literally got my own copy of this way after we read it, and like I was going through to like tab some of my favorite scenes and ended up like rereading half of this book because I was just obsessed with this writing. I'm obsessed with these characters. Their romance is so incredibly beautiful. This is definitely by far my favorite. It's for sure my favorite historical romance. It might be my favorite romance of all time. Like it's way up there, so it definitely had to be on this list. I am honestly obsessed with this. So if you like historical, Scottish, anything of that nature, do yourself a favor and read this because you will not be disappointed. I got my best friend to read this, and like she and I don't align in some of our reading tastes, so I didn't know how she was going to feel about this, but she loved it too. So like, it's great, guys. Why haven't you read it yet? Honestly. Okay, rant over. The next book on my that is kind of ending at this point, list is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am obsessed with this book. I understand why everyone loves it now. It basically follows Evelyn Hugo, who has been very, very quiet about her life, is not giving anyone like biographies, basically won't do interviews, won't tell anyone about her life. And this reporter basically gets called, and they've discovered that like Evelyn's like, yeah, okay, I'll give my story to her specifically and only to her. And so she comes over to Evelyn's house and they have this conversation. And so this book is set an interview. It's not told in like an interview style, but it is switching back and forth between like a reporter's point of view and then Evelyn's point of view. And so like, and when we're in Evelyn's point of view, it's literally just her telling the story. So it's very clever. I found the way it was told really interesting. I found the story that was being told really interesting because we do find out there's this question of like, why this reporter? And so that is a conversation that is had in this book. And I just think it's this beautiful story about a woman and the hardness that was the golden age of Hollywood, and her having to live through this, and the situations that she was in, and like who was her true love, that kind of, that kind of stuff. And I thought it was like, it's very interesting to see the character of Evelyn Hugo become who she is. So I adored this. I read it way after everyone else, but I understand why everyone was obsessed with it, and it's well worth the hype. So definitely had to be on this list. And then the very last book that's on this list is one that you could see a giant gap that is missing in the books that I talked about. I didn't forget it. It's Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. I have never stopped talking about this book since I read it because I read this on a whim. I had never read anything by Sarah J. Maas before. I read this for a vlog I did at the beginning of 2020. Is that right? 2021 maybe, where I read books that other people had given like their favorites of the year. Some of my favorite YouTubers, I decided to do their books. I was hesitantly optimistic because I had never read anything by Sarah J. Maas before, but everything I'd heard was something that I think I would have enjoyed in her writing and her stories, and I was not wrong. So this is by far my favorite by her. I still really enjoy the ACOTAR series, which is right there. I plowed through those in like a year. No, in like 3 months, honestly. So I really enjoy that series as well, but this is still my very favorite book by her. Like, I even reread this book in preparation for the second one coming out, and honestly, I could see myself reading this one and the second one before the next one comes out. Like, just kind of continuing that cycle because I enjoyed it so much, and it was really interesting to read it because the first time I read it, I was not sure what to expect. I was kind of going into it completely blind. I wasn't like, I didn't know, you know? And so the second time I read it, I picked up on things that I definitely didn't pick up on the first time. Especially when it comes to like the world building. Her world building is great, but if you're not paying attention, it could get very confusing very quickly. But I loved this one so much. It definitely had to be on this list. I mean, we couldn't have a favorites list without Crescent City. This is the first book I thought about when I was creating this list, honestly. So I'm not going to say too much because I feel like I've done nothing but rave about this book for 2 years. So I loved it. I loved it. It had to be on this list. It's definitely a favorite. I am never going to not love this book. So I ended with a good one. So that's it. Those are my favorites as of right now. Kind of a 2022 update. Maybe I'll keep track of this and make this like a yearly thing of just like a few books that I add on to this list because I realize a lot of these are recent books, but I don't know, like I feel like my reading has drastically changed, but I would not take a single one of these off this list. I think all of them are definitely here for a very good reason, and I just love them so much. So those are some of my favorites. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you've read, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, or give me a couple of books that would be on your favorites of all time list. I know, I'm not going to limit it to one because that's ridiculous. When people ask me what your favorite book is, that's just a rude question. But give me a few, just a handful of books that are your favorites. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!